Thank you, Jackie. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Welcome all to our fourth cataloging forum, the first one after the conference, which is Introduction to Hebrew Paleography. Thank you all for coming, and we truly, truly appreciate it. Today's session is led by Dr. Judith Olzsowy-Schlager, a French Jewish studies scholar who specializes in medieval Jewish documents. And Dr. Olzsowy-Schlager is also the president of the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies at the University of Oxford. We will have approximately 45 minutes of presentation time and about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. Please feel free to answer all questions in the chat. Lastly, please observe proper decorum during this session. I now turn over the mic to Judith. Thank you very, very much.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Why so?
Let me just put in the chat here.
Look, I'm really sorry. I can't hear you at all. So I understand that you can hear me.
Correct. Can you hear me?
I don't know what is happening. So
next to your microphone.
Shall I try to join again, or shall I begin to talk? And we are going to see about the questions later. Please make a sign. Correct. Okay, right. Yes, well, no, I'm sorry, I don't know how to adjust my audio settings. I'm trying to do that. I can only mute. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Well, it says that everything is okay. Next to the microphone, yes. Yeah. Speakers. What's the conceptual input? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I still can't hear you. Okay. Check the volume. Switch to phone audio, text speaker. Yes. No, it's not good. Now I can hear myself.
Can you hear us if you can hear yourself?
I can, yes. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So all is well. Wonderful. The miracle has happened. Excellent. I'm sorry about that. And is Chaim here?
Oh, you're all good.
Okay, so we are good. So you'd like me to introduce myself and begin, yes?
Yes.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. I apologize for these shortcomings. I'm Judith Olzsowy-Schlager. I teach medieval Hebrew paleography at École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, and also at the University of Oxford, where I am as well president of the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies. And my specialty, or one of my specialties, is Hebrew paleography in the most technical and strict sense. which is the study of the Hebrew script. I'm a medievalist. I work on medieval period, and I would like today, I think that we have about 1 hour and a half to try to introduce you to the
Correct.
period. I know some of you, and I know that you know a lot about paleography and about book history, but it is always a little bit difficult to prepare a presentation without knowing the public. So there will be probably things that you already know. So I apologize for that. And now another hurdle. Are we going to manage to share the screen? Yes, I think that we can. Good. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So I would like to give today a general introduction to the methods of paleographical research. Oh, I'm sorry, there is, in my institute, there seems to be a fire alarm going off. I hope that it's nothing wrong. Everything is going wrong today. I'm sorry about that. Well, I will go and see, excuse me. I'm sorry, someone has pressed on the security camera, and it's going to go on like that. I hope that you can hear me despite the noise that I have here in my background. I'm sorry
Yes,
again
we
about
hear
that.
you clearly.
Yeah, is it okay for you?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, very good, very good. And the noise does not disturb you? Okay, good.
No.
It just disturbs me, but it should be fine. Right, so to begin with, when we talk about the history of the Jewish people, we talk about Jewish books. Jews are the people of many books. Of course, as we know in the Islam called the Jews, the people of the book. But actually what is wonderful about the history of the Jewish people is that the Jews are the people of many, many books. During the medieval period, we know that books were produced both in private contexts, but also in more institutionalized professional contexts, in workshops. And although Jewish community was a very tiny percentage of the medieval population, books that survived from the medieval period are proportionally many, and this despite the fact that Jewish books were at times victims of programmed destruction, such as burning of the Talmud, and also they shared the history of the Jewish people, sometimes very sad history, where the communities, entire communities, were displaced and traveled with the books. So despite these historical difficulties, we are very happy to still possess thousands of medieval Hebrew manuscripts and documents, and also fragments of books and documents, both from Oriental communities and from European communities. We know that books and written records were essential for Jewish liturgy, law and administration, for economic activities, but also for the pleasure of reading. And from at least the time of the huge development of reading culture in the Oriental communities, which probably followed the development of the Arabic adab, we have evidence that Jews amassed large private libraries and simply enjoyed the reading. Although in the Middle Ages, even if you read books for enjoyment, you always read them for study. But we have books from the medieval period and also records about the books, which show that books were simply enjoyed by the readers. Books were, of course, sacred objects. We know all of us about scrolls which were used in liturgy, They were also guides for professional activities, medical books, manuals, but they were also symbols of Jewish identity. The Jewish cathedrals, as Colette Sirat has called them, indeed, the Jewish communities, numerically very small, as far as medieval period is concerned, did not leave enormous famous buildings, cathedrals, or palaces, but they left manuscripts. And these manuscripts are the best witnesses of the past of these communities. Sometimes they are the only witnesses of the past of the communities. They are therefore the best sources for the study of Jewish history. However, the majority of the manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts preserved until today, do not contain an explicit indication of the date and place of being written. We know how important it is when we deal with historical sources to be able to place these particular sources, written books, in a historical context. In order to do so, we have to study the book from many different points of view. And here there is this adaptation of the famous Darnton scheme of the study of the book, history of the book, adapted for medieval Hebrew tradition. But we see that in order to study the Hebrew book or Hebrew document, we need to consider it as a very complex object, and not just any material object, but the object which carries the text. Today, we are not going to talk about the book from all its points of view, context of production, the text that it carries. We are going to focus on the book's materiality, and in particular on one specific part of the material aspect of the book, which is the book's writing. When I talk about the book's materiality, I usually quote the book definition. What is a book? Which comes from Talmud Gittin, from the Babylonian Talmud. Ma sefer davar she'ein bo ruach chaim ve'eino ochel. The book is a thing which is inanimate and which doesn't eat. This is the definition of an object. The book for the Talmud, sefer, well, sefer is a book, but it can be also a legal document, written document. For the Talmud, is an object. And when we look at the Mahzor of Worms, very famous liturgical manuscript, 13th century liturgical manuscript, most of us know about an inscription which is found within the letters, Hebrew letters, the inscription in Yiddish or early German form, which praises and gives the blessing to the person who carries the Mahzor to the synagogue for prayer from a private house. So the Mahzor was kept in the private house. But why the prayer? Because the Mahzor is extremely heavy, especially in Germany between the mid-13th and mid-14th century. Books tended to be enormous, some of them reaching more than 60 centimeters in height and extremely heavy. So carrying a book to a synagogue was very special. But I think that the weight of books is a very important element for their description and categorization. And there is nothing more than the weight. For all of us working in the libraries, we can feel it, that talking about book as the object, we talk about sometimes a tiny, but sometimes an imposing object, and how important the materiality of the book is for the history of this object. So of course, we could approach the book from the point of view of the codicology, book forms, like here, the codex or the rotulus, the roll, which is unrolled vertically, unlike the Sefer Torah or liturgical scroll, which is unrolled horizontally. The composition, the parchment, paper, or papyrus, leather for scrolls, the ink, the composition of black inks. All these are material elements of the books, which are essential when we examine a manuscript, a medieval manuscript. Today, I'm not going to talk about all these important physical aspects because I would like to talk a little bit more about the writing, about the script as such. But before I'm going to do it, very briefly in a few words, I would like to present the corpus of the manuscripts. So we talk about the medieval Hebrew manuscripts. What does it mean? First of all, when we talk about Hebrew manuscripts, we talk about manuscripts in Hebrew script. They can be written in Hebrew or Aramaic, two languages which are identity languages, traditional languages of the Jewish people, but which are no longer spoken vernacular during the medieval period. The Jews speak the languages of their environment, and very often, not always, but very often, these languages are written in Hebrew script. We know today that Jews in medieval Islamic age world wrote in Arabic just as they spoke in Arabic, and that the Arabic writing for most educated and professional people was extremely proficient. We are increasingly convinced as well that Jews in medieval Europe knew, maybe not studied in an official context, but knew and could read Latin script. However, the majority of Jewish manuscripts that we have, which are written in non-Jewish languages, in vernacular non-Jewish languages, are written in Hebrew script, probably because the Hebrew script was the first script of Jewish education.
Excuse me, Judith.
Yes?
All we see are the words, the corpus. Is there supposed to be something else on the screen?
Yes, it will appear. Don't worry. Thank you. There were so many incidents that I understand that you are worried about my PowerPoint, but it is for the time being under control. Thank you. Yes, so the Jews learned at school, at least Jewish boys. I'm not talking about Jewish girls. There were, of course, Jewish girls in the Middle Ages who did learn how to read and write. And we know about 3 Jewish scribes who are women, and we have even some manuscripts written by women preserved. However, the majority, of course, of literate people, or at least people who went to school and learned in a more structured way, were boys who needed the skills of writing and reading for the liturgy, but also for professional life. So when we talk about the corpus, we talk about manuscripts written in Hebrew script rather than in Hebrew language. Manuscripts in Judeo-Arabic or Judeo-French, Judeo-Persian, Judeo-Tat, and so on and so forth are all a part of Hebrew manuscripts, because when they are written in Hebrew scripts, so they become an object of study of Hebrew paleographers. The big question is how the language which is reflected, which is written, influences the shape of the letters. Actually, it does. Maybe we won't have time to talk about it in detail, but for people writing primarily in Arabic, and especially writing in Arabic in Hebrew script, the Arabic accent of their writing, like the accent in the speech, will be evident in some forms of a more uncontrolled or quick writing. So the corpus of Hebrew manuscripts are manuscripts written in Hebrew script and not necessarily in Hebrew language. Today, from the 10th to 16th century, we speak about around 70,000 codices. Of course, it is a small amount when you compare with hundreds of thousands or even millions manuscripts written in Arabic or in Latin script. However, for tiny Jewish communities, it is, and as I said, manuscripts being destroyed, sometimes systematically through history, it is an important amount of writing. We have as well 350,000 fragments from the Cairo Geniza or the Genizot in Egypt. There, we know that there was the Ben Ezra Geniza synagogue the Geniza in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat. However, there were other places from which the manuscripts were recovered, including the Basatin cemetery in Cairo. Today, the fragments of the so-called Cairo Geniza, because they come from different places, are scattered in 72 libraries across the world. When we think that the community of Fustat, Old Cairo today, was a very dynamic economic community, but it was just one of the many communities, Jewish communities of the Islamic world, just one of the communities of Egypt, just one of the communities of the Near East or North Africa. We can easily imagine how enormous the production of Jewish books was, because just from this one place in Egypt, we have this large amount of fragments. We don't know yet, because the catalog and the study of the Cairo Geniza fragments is by far not finished, but we estimate that when we put together these fragments, when we try to reconstruct the volumes of the books, there were about 30 to 40,000 books in the Cairo Geniza, and these books are most of them date between the 10th and the 13th century. So quite a short period, Fatimid and Ayyubid period of the history. Only 5% of Cairo Geniza documents are documentary writing. So we talk about fragments from the Cairo Geniza, but we also can talk about fragments found in European bindings, book bindings, the so-called European Geniza. We have discovered so far about 20,000 fragments across Europe, and we find fragments literally daily. So when you think about each fragment, that once this fragment was a book, we almost double the number of manuscripts that we have from certain parts of the medieval world. We have as well 2,000 documentary sources from Europe, legal documents, contracts written between the 11th and the 15th century. So to study Hebrew paleography, the corpus is important. It is also a corpus which, in a way, has been very well studied already as far as the manuscripts which are explicitly dated is concerned. So the manuscripts, books, not documents, books which contain the date of the scribe, the date which is written in the colophon of the scribe. So the scribe finishing his work writes the date, and sometimes, very rarely, the place where he worked, are extremely important, because not only they allow immediately to situate this particular manuscript in history, but also they allow us to use the dated manuscript to compare with undated manuscript, because the main method of paleography or codicology as well is simply the comparison. We compare what is unknown to what we know. So we take a manuscript which we know when and where it was written, and we compare it simply, or we compare the manuscript that we don't know with the one that we know. So in order to do so, we have a few tools, and I would like to talk today a little bit about the tools for the study of paleography. The most important of these tools is the Sfar Data database. You have here the first page of the database. It was probably one of the earliest projects of digital humanities. The project was created by the French and Israeli team of scholars under the direction of Professor Malachi Betarier and Professor Colette Sirat. This team of scholars since 1960s recorded all dated manuscripts across the world, Hebrew manuscripts across the world. And finally, since 1980s, the Israeli part of the project, under the direction of Malachi Betarier, created an online repository, the first database of manuscripts, which is now accessible completely freely to everyone online, with the possibility of searching for different, according to different categories and parameters. Unfortunately, as I said, only 3,500 manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts, medieval manuscripts, contain a date when they were written, and even less contain the place of writing. So we are very happy to have this wonderful tool, but still we need other ways, other means to date and localize and define and study the manuscripts which do not contain the date, still using this database of Svardata as the yardstick, as a comparison, possibility of comparison for the further study. Svardata is not a database of paleography. It is a database of codicology, the physical aspects of the manuscript, such as materials, composition of the quires, page layout, ink, and so on and so forth. The elements which were judged by the founders of the Hebrew Paleography project, Colette Sirat and Marie Batarier, easier to quantify than paleography, than the script. From the very beginning of the study of the Hebrew manuscripts in the 60s, well, obviously Hebrew script was studied much earlier, but from the moment of the creation of Hebrew Paleography project in the 60s, Hebrew manuscripts are studied in an institutional way, in a systematic way. From the very beginning of the project, the scholars realized that paleography has a great deal of subjectivity in its analysis, and in order to launch this new discipline, they decided to focus on what can be quantified in a more scientific way rather than judging the paleography. So the Hebrew Paleography project from 1960s devised the most important methodological framework to study Hebrew paleography, including the definition of large typological areas of codicology and paleography. However, since then, the project focused mostly on codicology, and our paleography tools are still at their beginnings. Of course, great scholars such as Ada Yardeni and Edna Engel worked on paleography and have produced specimens of the Hebrew script, some yardstick elements for the study, comparative study of paleography, but unlike codicology, Hebrew codicology, which is very well advanced, Hebrew paleography is still at its beginnings. So I have already spoken about the study of the codices. The way of studying the codices is helped through the Svardata database. The study of the fragments from the Cairo Geniza is helped as well by the digital projects, which allow us to consult very easily the manuscripts online. Of course, those who work on manuscripts know how, on the one hand, wonderful the digital copies are. You can enlarge manuscripts, see certain elements better. However, we all know how images can be misleading and how important the contact with the original manuscript can be. And sometimes you can form your paleographical opinions working from wonderful digital copy when you go and touch the manuscript. When you really hold the manuscript in your hand, your first impression can be changed. So I work a lot, of course, and I'm very happy to have the possibility of working with all these wonderful digital developments today. However, it is very difficult for me to form a paleographical opinion without seeing the original, and this is what I always say, what I always tell my students, that it is important. It is always important, even more so in the digital age, to go and correct your impression against the original manuscript. Its weight, its smell, the touch of the parchment is extremely informative and can inform our impression of the script itself. So the Cairo Geniza, we are extremely lucky because the overwhelming majority of the fragments from the Cairo Geniza has been digitized and it's accessible to all of us on this wonderful Friedberg Geniza project, which is now a part of the huge digitization project of the National Library of Israel, which is called KTIV, the great idea of having online accessible the entire library of digital copies of medieval Hebrew manuscripts. We have as well wonderful possibility of consulting good quality images in separate libraries. It concerns Hebrew codices, it concerns as well Hebrew Geniza fragments. The most important of them, it's of course Paleography Geniza Research Unit in Cambridge, because more than a half of fragments from the Cairo Geniza are today kept at Cambridge University Library in the UK. As for the recycled manuscripts in the bindings of other books, I told you that we have already about 20,000 fragments like that. The way of recycling is very, very different. Sometimes these are wrappers of manuscripts from outside. Sometimes these are fly leaves, like here in this Cambridge Pembroke College 12th century English prayer book, fly leaves which separate or which protect the book from the wooden binding. We have paper manuscripts that have been reused and have to be restored very carefully. As you can see here, this is the restoration which is being done in Girona Historical Archives in Catalonia, in Spain. As I said, the number of fragments from Europe is being increased really daily, and we have as well a website where all these fragments are progressively being described and digitized and accessible to the public, which is called Books Within Books, Hebrew Fragments in European Libraries. So now I would like, after presenting the corpus and the possibilities of working on it, I would like briefly to talk about the aims of paleography. Why do we study Hebrew paleography? Well, in the Middle Ages, the script and Hebrew script in particular was studied for many different reasons. The Talmud contains description of script, of letters, of shapes of the letters, usually in the context of liturgical scrolls. So the letters are described, the correct shapes are described, because when the letters are traced incorrectly, they are difficult to read, and then the scroll cannot be used for liturgical purpose. So there is a clear connection between the work of the scribe and the shapes of the letters and liturgy. There is as well in the Middle Ages a very important use for the examination of the script, for the expertise of the script in the legal context. We know about fakes, forgeries of documents, which were studied by experts or by people who knew the handwriting of the signatories. So the study of the script was important in liturgical or legal context. But of course, it had nothing to do with scientific and historical study. Paleography is not about legal validity or religious validity of documents, but about the historical value. And as such, it goes back to the Latin paleography and the 17th century achievements of Latin paleographers, and especially of Jean Mabillon and his work on diplomatics, the 6 books of diplomatics, one of which is dedicated to paleography as the way of judging not only the authenticity of the manuscripts, but also the historical value. So we work on Hebrew script as historians. And what are we going to expect from paleographical analysis? So first of all, paleography is supposed to help us to read unreadable. So when the manuscripts are difficult to read, what does it mean that the manuscript is difficult to read? First of all, the manuscript can be objectively difficult to read because there are problems of conservation, like with this Geniza palimpsest. You can see the Greek and the Hebrew written each one at 90 degrees to each other. So when the manuscript is missing, half of it eaten by mice. So we have text telling us that medieval texts, especially Arabic texts, telling us that mice love parchment, whereas worms love paper. So here we have clearly a manuscript which was damaged very seriously. So of course, when we have a damaged parts, it's very difficult to read them, to reconstruct them. Even a very good paleographer will not help much. Objective problems can be problems of conservation. They can be partly helped. Of course, not when the manuscript, part of the manuscript is missing, but when the ink is faded. There are today many ways of enhancing the reading, and paleography can help, because when you have a precise knowledge of the specific type, geographical and cultural type of script you are working on, you expect certain forms and you can easier reconstruct them than scholars who have no experience with manuscripts. So even with objective problems, paleography can help a little. Paleography can help a lot with subjective reading problems. Subjective problems, that means when the script or handwriting is completely legible. The manuscript is clear. The script is well preserved, but it is difficult to read because we are not used to it. So, for instance, 18th century Ashkenazi script is notoriously impossible to decipher. And 15th century Sephardi script, equally difficult. But if it is difficult for us, it doesn't mean that it was difficult for people who used it. Of course, there are scribes whose handwriting is more difficult than others. We know it from our own handwriting today. However, the subjective problems simply means that we need to train, to put ourselves in a mindset and try to see the manuscript with the eyes of people from the past. So they used certain types of script. We are simply not used to this type of script. Why? Because our eye and our brain is trained to recognize specific forms of the letters. Those who study Hebrew today and read Hebrew today will find it very easy to read square Sephardi medieval manuscripts, the Bible manuscripts. Why? Because we are all used to Hebrew type of modern Israeli books. And the type of modern Israeli books was based on the shape of Sephardi square letters. This is why Sephardi square paleography is not a problem for us to read. The manuscripts subjectively are very easy to read. But the cursive scripts from the same period, from the same Iberia, can be extremely difficult. So what the paleography will do? The paleography will guide you how to train your eye in order to recognize the forms which are completely different from the forms to which we are used. So it's the question of training. And we actually have some online digital tools to help. One of them is Multipal. It is a tutorial, paleographical tutorial, where you can simply, I have taken screenshots. I didn't want to go into the databases, not to get confused and not to have technical problems. But this is a tutorial which was devised in Paris in École Pratique des Hautes Études, where you can simply transcribe word by word manuscripts from digital images, good quality digital images. And while you transcribe the manuscript, the computer is telling you whether you are doing it correctly or not. It has been devised from many different languages, but among them, we have medieval Hebrew samples, and those who want to train to read the script, which is unfamiliar, can do it very easily through this database. So we have as well, so read unreadable, it's one of the most obvious aims of the paleography. But the one which is the most important for history, it's to date and localize. That means to establish a typology. And this typology of Hebrew scripts is the major contribution to history. When you study a literary text, you want to edit it from a manuscript. It's very important to get the text right, to compare it with other manuscripts. But it is equally important to realize when the manuscript was written and how it was received, what was the reception of this manuscript, how people read this manuscript, how the readers related to this particular text at a certain time. That means at the time when the manuscript was written. Of course, paleography, it is also the study of the more technological and cognitive aspects of the work of individual scribes. We can talk about typology of the script as the type being an abstract entity. Many scribes working at the same time in the same place will share some characteristics of the script. This is the script type. But at the same time, every single scribe will write in a very individual way. They all learned in the same place at the same time. So we are going to be able to attribute all these different samples, different handwritings, different individual hands to the same large group type of script. But at the same time, we shouldn't lose track of the person behind the writing, of the scribe. Because this person, who sometimes we know nothing about the scribe, sometimes the scribes indicate their name either in the colophon or decorating the name when it appears in the manuscript. But in most cases, we know absolutely nothing about the person who left this inscribed object in front of us. But by the study of the script, by following the ductus, that means the way that the scribe worked, the way he traced individual strokes, and the way these strokes combined to create letters, we can follow the work of this person we don't know for half an hour. We can see, oh, here he made a mistake, or here visibly his calamus or quill, his writing implement, did not work very well, and here he had to go and get new ink because his ink was too watery. Oh, and here he was really tired and trying to rush to finish the page. Probably that was the end of the day, and the sun was setting, and he was afraid that he won't have any more light to continue his work, or maybe he was cold. So we can, through the script, we can follow the work of the person we don't know. So there is also this cognitive aspect of paleography. And finally, of course, when we have identified the script and the handwriting, paleography contributes to the fashionable discipline of manuscript study, of history of literacy, or book history. So there are many uses of paleography, but the one that we are all looking forward to the most is this historical way of dating and localizing, with its basic difficulties that I have already mentioned. Only 3,500 manuscripts contain the explicit date of when they were written, even less were. The state of discipline, as I told you, is still at its beginning. And there are, of course, some inherent difficulties with script and handwriting expertise, because indeed, the paleography is by some of its practitioners considered to be a subjective art. We still don't have tools of measuring the writing, not only the effect, the shapes of the letters, the final product of the writing, but also the work, the dynamic work, the ductus, the dynamic work of the scribe. Can you measure it? When you look at the writing, even your own writing, you write yourself the same letter A in many different ways. They may be very different from each other. Then you will talk about allographs. You use different 2, 3, or more different allographs of the letter. But even if the letters are just slightly different, these are not allographs, it's still the same shape of the letter Aleph. You write it by hand, they will never be identical. So many paleographers, because of these inherent problems of human script, the script is actually a product of human mind, human eye, and human hand. So as a handmade artifact, they are not machine-made. So there are many, many problems with dating. And also the way of defining and communicating about the script can be very difficult. From even one paleographer may disagree with another. And although there are very few paleographers, Hebrew paleographers in the world, we don't use the same terminology. And we understand each other, but terminologies can differ as well. I have brought here the quotation from Montague Road James, who was a famous paleographer working in England. He was the author, you have his dates, the turn of the 19th and 20th century, the Victorian time. He was also the author of Gothic novels. One of them is called the Tractate Midot. If you don't know it, I recommend it very, very much because it happens in Cambridge University Library. So it's very, very important for us. So Montague Road James, who wrote numerous catalogs of medieval Latin manuscripts, he was one of the leading paleographers. He said, and that was in his notes, published well after he died, "I cannot teach the art of assigning the dates to manuscripts. I am even inclined to think that it cannot be taught. The study of facsimiles to begin with, and later on, the constant handling of the books themselves. These supply the only safe guidance to the condition of the eye and mind, which will enable the student to say unhesitantly, this is a 12th century book, and this is a 15th, this was written in Italy, and this in England. For myself, I have come to depend almost entirely upon general impression in forming an estimate of date." So what is the greatest paleographer telling us is, well, there is no point of studying specific shapes of the letters. You really need to have an experience to handle manuscripts, a lot of them. And with years of experience, you will be able to propose the dating based on very global approach. Well, I think that what Montague Road James was actually doing is that he looked at the manuscripts, and in a way, his brain, his eye and his brain would identify some pertinent features of the script, which will guide him in maybe not so conscious way for a trained paleographer. So for him, it was an art, an intuition in a way, in order to decide whether the script dates from the 12th or 15th century. However, it is the case that there are differences between 12th and 15th century. And even if Montague Road James is telling us, I cannot really say, it's difficult to explain, actually he can perceive these differences. So one approach is, it is an art, it's subjective. However, the pertinent features of the script do exist because the script does change in time and in place. Solomon Birnbaum, who is probably the only author of sample book of different Hebrew scripts from all the periods from antiquity to medieval period, has taken a completely different approach. For him, paleography was a science and it was measurable. He said, in investigating the development of script, the forms of the letters have to be examined in the greatest possible detail. This is to be done, so to speak, by means of measuring. That is the basic method of paleography. For instance, in giving a description of a cursive, what we are really doing is to enumerate a series of measurements. He even evaluated the number of the measurements you have to take in order to define the script. 100,000 of them, according to my rough estimate. Well, at the time of Solomon Birnbaum, it was not easy to practice. Today, there are several computer-based projects which measure the letters and which try to establish clusters of features based on measurements. Well, so now I'd like to come to myself as a paleographer. I have already, I think, explained the difference between script and handwriting. I'd like to come here to myself as a paleographer and the method of paleography that I would like to explain to you. I don't think that paleographers work by intuition, and I don't think that measuring the letters, even with the computer precision, can help us. However, it is possible, and not only possible, it is being done to define specific features, pertinent features of the script, to differentiate, to realize what are the features which are important for typology and the ones which are not. When you see, even here, you have a series of the letters Aleph that I have taken from a primer for children who are learning how to read and write. Because when we talk about the type of script, we actually need to consider the models that were followed, the models which were mental models, the models acquired during education. Our teachers were telling us how to write specific shapes of the letters. But there are as well the models which are physical models, which are in front of the people who write. Here we have a primer that was used as both. Children were learned the shapes of the letters by filling up, this is the 11th century, probably 11th century Cairo Beniza, famous primer for children from Egypt. So children were learning how to write by filling in the shapes of the letters. So learning the shape of the letters to recognize them in reading, but also the gesture, the ductus, the gesture of the hands. So of course, when you are trained, you acquire a certain mental model. This is what will account for the pertinent features of the type of the script you are going to use. So of course, then the ability of reproducing this model will vary from one person to another. And there are going to be some characteristic features of every single person, which also can be defined. So I believe that the role of the paleographer, both in the typology of the script and in the definition of the handwriting, that means recognizing whether two documents were written by the same person or not. So script as a type, geography, chronology, history, and handwriting as the person behind, I believe that it is possible to define pertinent features which will allow us to give an answer. Of course, the answer given on the basis of paleography will never be 100% certain. However, through the application of a method, of a strict paleographical method, we can be more or less sure of our results, or certainly have an idea about how to proceed. So when we have in front of us a sample of writing, we need to bear in mind that there are many elements which will influence our opinion, our judgment of this writing. So first of all, the writing materials, the implement can change the first impression of the script very much. However, what we are going to focus on is going to be the script itself, and we are going to define the script from several points of view: the type, the mode of the script, but also the quality of the script, the function of the script. Was the scribe writing a Torah scroll or a display volume, or was he writing a book for himself or very informal notes? So the destination of the script will change its aspect without, however, changing its type or the hand. So we need to take into consideration all these different elements. And when we use the main method of paleography, which is comparison, we need to be able to compare the comparable elements only. So in the typology, now I'm going to move to typology, we define a script. So by type, we understand the geographical and cultural zone in which certain graphic elements can be defined. So since the work of Malachi Betari and Colette Sirat, the Hebrew paleographers differentiate between 6 different groups, 6 different types of script, which correspond, some of them, to codicological, technical elements of book production. We have Oriental, Yemenite, Sephardi, Italian, Ashkenazi, and Byzantine type. However, when we talk, and this is what is relatively easy to define after a basic paleography training, so it is quite easy to define the features of these large groups. But what we need to do now is to be much more precise. When we talk about Ashkenaz, we talk about a huge part of Europe, which goes from France to Eastern Europe, from England to North Italy. That's basically all of Europe. Not everyone wrote in the same way. So today's aim of paleography, since it's relatively easy to recognize an Ashkenazi script, today's aim of paleography will be to talk about smaller entities, subtypes of the script, as French, German, or Italo-Ashkenazi. Or in Sepharad, can we make a difference between Arabic culture, Andalus, or Provençal, or Italo-Sephardi scripts? And all this should be studied, must be studied today in paleography. We have to define as well the mode of the script, which can be calligraphic square, square, non-square, or cursive. We can talk about the quality, as I said. Writing can be formal, professional, well-trained, or it can be a child learning how to write. And sometimes you can have a very childish script, but it will be still oriental and square, even if it is not calligraphic. I took this map from Malachi Betarier, Hebrew Codicology. This is the distribution of these huge 6 zones, cultural zones of the Hebrew script. However, as I told you, not only there are different subtypes, different styles and subtypes within these large groups, but also the borders, as we see them here, were not stable, they were movable, and the scripts, together with the contacts between different countries, and the books that traveled with people, the script does not travel alone, it travels in books, and books travel with merchants, with travelers, with pilgrims. So the books were circulating, and the scripts, different subtypes of scripts, formed in specific cultural contexts and traveled from one place to another. So this very static map should actually move with time, and the borders of different types should change. For instance, when we talk about the Oriental script, we can differentiate from the very early attested documents. The most ancient dated attested Hebrew manuscripts are from the very beginning of the 10th century, dated, explicitly dated. From the very beginning of the 10th century, we have at least 2 different subtypes of Hebrew script. One, which I will call Oriental, Southwestern, comes from the places which originally were under Byzantine, Greek-speaking, Christian rule. Land of Israel, parts of Syria or Egypt, and parts of southeastern Italy. On the contrary, places which were dominated by the Sasanian Empire, and then all of them were conquered. The medieval period, it's already, we are talking after the Muslim conquest, right? But the substrate, the old cultures were there, Jewish communities, were there when the Muslims in the 7th century spread from Arabian Peninsula across North Africa, Middle East, and Central Mesopotamia and Central Asia. So when we talk about the Hebrew script from the very beginning of the dated samples, 10th century, it's centuries after the Muslim conquest, in the Orient, we can differentiate between Southwestern and Northeastern scripts, which are scripts of Iraq and Iran, Mesopotamia and Central Asia. They can be defined. Here I'm giving you examples in both cases of square, quite careful script. Of course, calligraphy was born in Iraq, so early Iraqi or Iranian Bibles can be extremely calligraphic, but we can differentiate some shapes of the letters. For instance, here I have picked up the shape of the letter Aleph, and we can define the differences, graphic differences of these two different subgroups of the Oriental script. Of course, we never define the script by one letter or one feature only, but I just give you one among many, many, many pertinent features, which here can be defined as the shape of the letter Aleph. Here in PR, you can see the shape of the letter Aleph of the Oriental Southwestern type, where the left-hand downstroke of the letter descends from the headline, from the top of the letter, straight to the baseline, as a straight line, with a tiny foot going towards the middle of the letter. When you look here, the shape of the letter Aleph in the Oriental Northeastern, or let's say Babylonian, early square script is very different. The left-hand part of the letter descends at some distance from the headline with a curly knee and with a foot going towards the left of the letter. So we have a very clear graphic distinction between these two subgroups. And amazingly, we can follow some developments of the script, a very similar shape of the letter Aleph, the skeleton of the letter Aleph, just the basic skeleton structure of the letter in the Italian group of manuscripts. Here I have taken Codex Reuchinianus, which was written at the very beginning of the 12th century, probably in the region of Rome in Italy, and then very similar features. And here we have the picture of the letter Aleph, were transmitted to the Ashkenazi world. And on the contrary, the Babylonian style, and still I follow the shape of the letter Aleph, were transmitted on the one hand, we find it in Yemenite manuscripts, and then in Persian manuscripts, of course, and then in North African manuscripts, and in Sephardi style. So when you follow the small graphic shape, and of course there are more graphic shapes or pertinent features that can be added to this one that I have given as example, you can simply follow from the graphic point of view the connection between different groups of script. And for those who know Jewish history, will see that the transmission of graphic paleographical shapes actually corresponds to what we know about the transmission of the historical and intellectual contacts between these different parts of the Jewish world. So paleography is important and can be used as history, but what is important is that we need to be able to define these pertinent features that we could follow. So here I am giving you the example of these two different Alephs. So this is the northeastern Aleph and this is the southwestern Aleph. Southwestern Aleph, if you were to continue the foot which goes towards the middle of the letter, actually looks like a Greek alpha. Amazing. Maybe there is a connection. We are here in front of the Aleph that developed in the ancient Byzantine Greek-speaking lands. But what is important, this is just a possibility. not so important for us. What is important is that we are able to define a set of features of the letter Aleph, which will differentiate between these two groups. And then level 2 is the interpretation. But for the time being, we focus on the differences. And we can do it by picking up specific features. However, when you work on a manuscript, when you are not a trained paleographer, and I remember when I was not a trained paleographer, when 25 years ago, I was going to the library excited about the manuscripts because I was learning how to become a paleographer. I would sit in front of this exciting manuscript and I would say, wow, this is great. I would count the quires because I was taught by Colette Sirat, to whom I'm very grateful, how to describe the manuscript from codicological point of view. But then looking at the script, the manuscript would not talk to me. Colette Sirat has always told us that going back to see a manuscript that you have once seen, it's like seeing an old friend. And it's only years later that I have realized what it means to see an old friend. To see an old friend, it means to ask questions about family members, activities that we share, that we both know about. So when you talk to an old friend, you talk to someone whom you know. You know what questions to ask to receive an answer. It is the same with paleography. You need to have a set of questions. You ask the manuscript in order the manuscript talks back to you. Otherwise, you are there, you read the text, you begin to transcribe the text, you maybe begin to describe the letter after letter, but you won't be able to identify the pertinent features. Here, I have just given you an example of the three modes: square script, non-square, and cursive. These are Oriental examples. The cursive is from North Africa, the beginning of the Maghrebi style. And when we talk here about this change of the mode, again, in order to be able to question the manuscript, to say, well, this is square and this is cursive, we need to have a certain method and vocabulary in order to explain why we call this square. Well, it looks a little bit square. This is how we call Hebrew script because the basic shapes are square. But why do I call it cursive? What does it mean for the script to be cursive? This is extremely important, and actually we can define it in just a few words. First of all, there is a reduction of the number of strokes. The script becomes more vertical because it's so much easier, quicker to trace a line from top to bottom rather than from left to right, because this is how a scribe writing with the right hand, Hebrew scribe, will trace the letter. The Hebrew script goes from left to right, but the individual elements, when he begins to trace the horizontal part, he would begin from left to right if he's a right-handed scribe. So vertically, change of the meeting place between the elements of the letter. This one is the letter He, like here. This is He, this is Ko. This is Ko, this is He. What is happening? The change of the meeting place between the lobe of the letter and the descender of the letter. Instead of being attached at the left-hand corner of the lobe, the descender of the letter Ko here is attached to the bottom of the lobe. We see immediately what happened. When we trace a square Ko, let's say the scribe begins by tracing the lobe of the letter. He stops here, he lifts the pen, and he has to go back to the top of the line. So he made one movement, two movements, and now he makes the movement number 3. He traced maybe the letter in 2 visible movements, but he made 3 movements because the invisible movement counts. It's a fraction of a second, but when you write 500 folios, of a manuscript, these fractions of seconds add to days of work. When the scribe attaches the descender to the lower part of the lobe of the letter, he writes the entire letter with one movement. Not only the letter is very horizontal, very vertical, the horizontal part of the letter was reduced, but all the letter is traced with one movement. It is exactly the same goes for the letter Hey. There is also the choice of rounded lines rather than broken. It's quicker. There are some ligatures, that means two letters are written closely together, touching each other or without lifting the pen. And the baseline and headline is less regular because here you can trace this imaginary headline, the letter Hey, and the baseline for the letter Hey. The letter is, the body of the letter is included within the headline and baseline. But if you write the letter in such a way that its left-hand part is attached to the baseline, very often you will have to go below the baseline. So you do not respect this regular baseline. So in this, just a few words, I have defined what I understand by cursive. So cursive from Latin, it means quick, running. It's a running script. So of course you use it for specific types of text. But from graphic point of view, you need to be able to explain what it means. So actually what I have done here, I have found some pertinent features which define the cursivity of the script as the definition of its rapidity and density. The cursive script lines are written closely together. So as rapidity and density, I was able to define the cursive script. The modes of script do not mean that when the scribe writes faster, it means or uses the shapes of the letters of the fast writing, that it's not decorative. You can have square and non-square modes of script used as bookhand, as very decorative script, as here I have given you a few examples of the Ashkenazi mode. We have calligraphic square mode, which is basically used for Bibles and prayer books. We have at the same time, in the same place, they are both French manuscripts. This is the Florence Talmud and this is a Poligny Bible, Paris BNF Hebrew 36. So they are not from the same period, but this is a Talmudic manuscript where the square script is much simpler. It lacks the pronounced calligraphic Gothic features such as fishtail, drop shape, lozenge shape endings of the letters, and very thin hairline serifs and additions to the letters. It is still Ashkenazi, it is square, it is used for writing a book, so it is a perfectly legible and careful script. It contains a feature which is not found in Hebrew Bible manuscripts. It can be found in a Targum, but not in the Hebrew Bible, which is called fusion or biting. That means the letter Aleph loses, it's a kind of ligature, I would say, loses a part of it, its left-hand part, and uses the following letter to lean on it. It simply bites into the following letter. Here we have Aleph Lamed, here we have Aleph Het, here we have Aleph Yud. This is a feature which will be found in Talmudic and Halachic Ashkenazi manuscripts from the 12th century, like this manuscript from Florence, Talmud of Florence, up to the 14th and even 15th century. So it is a characteristic feature of the simple Talmudic and Halachic square script. We have as well non-square examples of books, some of them written in a very simple mode, and some others are very calligraphic, but they are not square. So you can have different modes, all used for writing books. And we have examples of scribes who are perfectly able to use different modes of script. And here we have an example of notes from the Cairo Beniza of Joseph Ben Jacob Rosh Hasseder, who was a warak, a stationer. He came from Iraq to Egypt and earned his life as bookseller and book scribe. We have several dozens of fragments in his characteristic handwriting. He wrote lists of books he would like to copy. He talks about Mishneh Torah of Maimonides or commentaries of Maimonides. But here we have a very interesting example where he writes samples of texts in slightly different modes of Oriental script. Quite, you know, he has very calligraphic square, and then he has non-square bookhand. He has calligraphic square with vowels, and he has samples, like here, of more cursive non-square script. So he was able to use 4 different modes of script. Maybe he was writing them on this piece of paper to show potential customers, potential patrons who would order books from him, to let them choose what mode of writing of script they would like to use. And finally, in order, I still have 10 minutes of this communication. I talked a lot about this importance of communicating first with the manuscript and second with the students and between scholars themselves. I have been teaching Hebrew paleography for 20 years in École Pratique des Hautes Études, where I occupy what is probably the only chair which is entirely dedicated to Hebrew paleography. And throughout these 20 years, I used a method the method that I elaborated myself, of course, standing on the shoulders of the giants of my teachers, Colette Sirat, Malachi Betarier, Edna Engel. However, I elaborate a method which is different and which takes the form of a checklist of pertinent features of the manuscript, which when I wrote it down for my students, the checklist was more than 110 pages long. Not very easy to work with such a checklist of the questions you have to ask the manuscript in order to describe the manuscript, but also in order to learn about how to describe a manuscript. This checklist, which was also inspired by a court expert in writing, Marie-Jeanne Seden, who worked in French courts and worked on Latin paleography, is based on 2 stages: global image, global judgment of the script, and a very detailed description of every single graphic element of the script. In order to make this method usable and easy for the students, finally this year, with the help of several different projects, the project of Jewish book culture in the Islamic world, but also the Rothschild Foundation Hanadi project in École Pratique des Hautes Études on Hebrew paleography in digital age, I was able to create, a wonderful developer whose name is Mike Alloway, developed a database, online database, which includes the checklist that I have created for my students for teaching paleography, so that now this is live. So for the time being, the database is empty. It has just been published online. So we don't have many descriptions for the time being. We are working on that. The idea was to create a hierarchically developed checklists online, which will allow to describe any graphic element. The graphic elements that we describe are not only consonants, letters, but also abbreviations, decoration, some stylistic elements of decoration. Like here you have these palmettes, you can describe it as well. The name of God, divine symbols, the means of justification, such as here you have broken letters, for instance, at the end of the line to keep the line straight. Ligatures, magical characters. We have manuscripts where scribes write these letters. In German, they are called Brille letters, you know, the spectacled letters with little circles, and they have been deciphered. There is a correspondence between these magic letters and letters of the Hebrew alphabet. We can as well describe the Meshuna characters, the modified letters which appear in Torah scrolls, which are part of the scribal tradition. We can describe punctuation as well. And this database creates, first of all, the gallery of shapes, because before describing, you simply cut out manually with your mouse from the computer. You cut out manually specific shape of the letter Aleph, and then you describe this letter Aleph component by component. And every component, once you open the component, the features of this component of the letter Aleph appear, and you can choose the features. So this is the website that I hope will be used by scholars, because it's done not only in such a way that the use of the database creates a gallery of shapes of letters and other graphic elements, and it can be retrieved through a very powerful search engine where you can ask your database to show you all the letters Aleph which are oriental and whose foot goes towards the left, for instance. And then you can combine 10 or more features of letters, both of graphic description of the manuscript itself, or document, or even inscription, because we have a part which also deals with stone inscriptions. And you can search for specific features. So once we have several thousands of manuscripts on this database, I think that we have created the most amazing tools for comparison of graphic features. This is how it works. So you can sort everything through different filters. So you can search for books, for documents, or for inscriptions. You can annotate graphic elements or general features of the script, the global aspect of the script. You annotate your letters, you have here in green, according to components and features. And as I said, you can choose as many features as you want. So each time you simply tick the box on the checklist. And the most important thing is that automatically the running description is created. So when you go then to your graphic elements, you can choose your letter or you can choose your manuscript. There are all kinds of ways of connecting with what you are looking for. And then the description that you have introduced will appear. For students of paleography, it's extremely useful. It's not only wonderful for creating this yardstick comparison where you can search for an Aleph which looks like the Aleph in the manuscript that you have in front of you, and you would like to see all the other Alephs, other manuscripts containing such an Aleph or Beit or whatever. But for the students, it's wonderful because the description is guided in a way that when you describe your Aleph, you will click on the component of your letter, which by the way is also described in help. So I have given the description of vocabulary and components of the letters and so on and so forth. So the student would describe a specific component, and the student will have a limited choice of features of this component. So looking at the letter and looking at the choice, which is limited, that has to be made in the checklist, the student is guided to the description and acquires the paleographical skills, because he or she is not just looking at the shape of the letter or at the manuscript, but can interact through the questions which are offered and talk to the manuscript. And also, once you describe the manuscript by clicking on these specific elements, features, components and features, and you have the description, which is automatically created, well, you can take this description from your website and paste it straight into your doctoral dissertation, which means that your description is much facilitated because you simply click the corresponding elements, and also you will obtain a very consistent paleographical description where the graphic elements will be described in the same order, always consistently with the same vocabulary for the same pertinent feature. So for a student learning and having to describe, let's say, paleography of 60 manuscripts, it's an enormous work. Well, it can be done much quicker and in such a way that the student can really focus on observing the letter, and the description itself is partly automatic. So with this database, and I think that I have to finish just now because for me it's 9 o'clock, so I have spoken for 1 hour and a half. So with this database, I would like to close here. I think that we have created the way, which is, well, it's a kind of digital paleography, but this is a traditional paleography method which differentiates in a human way. It's not a computer generated, it's a human generated definition of pertinent feature. However, it is digitally supported, so we don't need to remember this enormous amount of features. We can run the checklist in a very, very efficient way by using the computer facilities. So now the next step will be to implement this database, to introduce thousands of manuscripts in order to create this comparative tool for the study of other manuscripts, but also, and this is a big hope, that the sufficient amount of data that we will include in this database will allow us at some point to access to yet another level of Hebrew paleography, which will be computational paleography, which will use the data gathered in a more or less manual and digital way for the computer to learn and to create its own computer-based, artificial intelligence-based or deep learning, through the deep learning relationships and features, which might actually be different from the features that we perceive as important as paleographers. So for the time being, it is the most traditional paleography. The advantage of the tool is that this is the only tool of this type that we have for Hebrew paleography, and it is digitally supported for an easier and more general reference across the world. I'm going to stop here, but I will be very happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you very, very much. This was unbelievable. I hope one day to take your course in totality. We have a few questions in the chat though. This was one of them came up.
Stop sharing so that I will see you better. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So one question came up with the cursive. I forgot, it was Halper 15 versus Halper 389. How do you tell the letter was a hey as opposed to a letter het?
Yes, good, good. So I think, well, okay, good. Yes, one of the characteristics of the Northwestern Oriental script is a possible confusion between hey and het. It's not a confusion of the scribes, it's our confusions. Why? Why did you ask this question? So I am going to tell you first why you asked this question. Because for us, the readers of modern Hebrew, I told you how important it is. In our mind, the letter hey and het that we have, it's the one of modern Hebrew books, right? What is the pertinent difference between hey and het in our Hebrew? This is the space between the upper horizontal bar and the left-hand downstroke. There is a gate, there is a little space. Well, the example that I have shown you did not have this space. I think that I have to share again, right? I will share again.
It was like the second or third to the end.
Yeah, wait. I will share again, so I will explain to you what I mean. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
Yes, this is the letter hey. Right. So what happens? We are misled by the lack of space here. You can see my arrow. Yes, my cursor.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Here. Okay. Sorry. I will use yellow. Here we expect a space. Yes. Well,
Yes.
we don't have it. So for us, it looks like a head. But in that time, I didn't bring the example of the head. I see that you are excellent paleographers. You spotted the problem immediately. In these letters, in this type of script, het is actually completely different. Why? Because the left-hand part, and now I'm going to use yet another color, I will use blue for that, is attached to the top of the upper horizontal bar, to the left of the upper horizontal bar, and goes straight from the top to the baseline, which means that it is removed from the center of the letter towards the left. Whereas in the letter hey, and what did I do? Yeah, sorry. Whereas in the letter hey, the left-hand downstroke is simply moved towards the middle of the letter. I have just defined to you the pertinent feature, which in this type describes the difference between het and hey. When you know it, you will never confuse them. But if you don't, and if you base yourself on your knowledge of your hey and your het, that means your mental model, we are all trained on Israeli type, which is like Sephardi type. This is why we are confused. But now you will never be confused because they actually don't look the same. I have, of course, somewhere the PowerPoints to show it to you, but I don't think that I have time to show you the examples now. But this is the main difference.
So, and Judith, we have, that was an excellent example. There's a question regarding, and we only, maybe just a few more minutes, we have a question regarding the website. Does it focus on medieval works only, or is there also later manuscripts? And another question is, can students make accounts? Can we also make accounts on your database, on the Hebrew paleography?
Yes, absolutely, yes. So it has to be, of course, supervised and controlled. So it is possible to make accounts. For students, everybody can do it by contacting me. Every single description will contain the name of its author. So if you describe a manuscript, your name will appear on the database. However, it will not be made public unless I authorize it. for the time being, and I discuss with students. So for the time being, there are 12 students who got in touch with me and they want to use the database for their own work. While they work on it, they learn from it. At the same time, that will allow the database to be implemented. However, it has to be done under supervision because we are creating a template for the others. So I will have to check the descriptions. So it won't go very fast because I have lots of other things to do, but indeed, this is the aim. And I am, on the contrary, extremely happy when people join the database. So yes, so the database is accessible to everyone, but by writing to me. So we can create a password to implement the database. And what was the first question? Sorry, I answered the second. About the database.
The first question, right, concerning, was it only medieval manuscripts or also much later?
No, so I am a medievalist. So of course, when I wrote my method, the method was done in such a way that I had in my mind my models of every single type and script. However, I work with students and colleagues who work on post-medieval manuscripts. So it was devised for manuscripts, mostly medieval, but we also included in our checklist the features which will describe early modern manuscripts. So it is not only for medieval. You can put actually anything in this database, and if there are no enough words in my database to describe pertinent features of the manuscripts which are post-medieval and I didn't think about these features, students or colleagues simply get back to me and we add the missing feature. So any manuscript can be described to it. So the aim is indeed to include post-medieval manuscripts too. We will start with early modern. Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. I think that we have lost Chaim. Do you have other questions without the chat? Oh yeah, there was in the chat. I see that there is a question about demo. I am very happy to show it to you. I have taken the screenshots because it's always complicated to go into, you know, I never know whether it will work when we go on database, but I can show it to you this time or some other time because it takes time to show you how to describe a manuscript in the database. So if you invite me again or anytime, or if I could invite you to as well in November, we start again, because every year I give a series of paleography lectures online for École Pratique des Hautes Études. It started during COVID time and it was very successful. So even after COVID, I continue giving once a week on Monday at 6 o'clock Paris time, 1 hour paleography course. And this year we are going to have 3 hours per week. Oh yes, Chaim is back, I think. So we are going to have 3 hours per week. We start in the middle of November, Monday evening, and it's going to be paleography and especially digital paleography with this database. It's going to be the e-scriptorium of Daniel Steckel-Ben Ezra with the automatic, computer-based edition of texts. And the 3rd hour will be about book materials and cataloging of Hebrew manuscripts. So paleography will be on Mondays at 6 o'clock, and we will work with the database. But I am very happy to show you how it works, how database works. If you want to stay now for some time, and if you are tired, I can come back, or you come to join us in Paris for our paleography lessons. just write to me.
Judith, I'm sorry, I lost my connection and I had to sign in with a second computer. That was my fault. So I want to thank you so much. I mean, we're almost at the 2-hour mark here too, but I see there was a lot of interest and a lot of people really express interest in learning more, and that's tremendous from us. And maybe we could work out something. It's something I would love to. I personally would like to take your course. I know that you offer at Oxford, so
it's the course in Oxford. I'm doing it for École Pratique des Hautes Études for Paris. It's in English, but we do it for Paris. And in Oxford, we have every year a workshop, 2 weeks workshop in Hebrew paleography at the Bodleian Library, where our wonderful library and librarian, Cesar Merchant-Hammond, allows us to learn paleography from Kennicott I, or the most wonderful treasures which are in front of us on the table. It's a wonderful opportunity. We have 1 week of medieval and 1 week of post-medieval manuscripts. So it's usually, we have just finished it. It's at the beginning of July. So we have a workshop in Oxford. And as far as the online course is concerned, of course, Oxford people participate in that as well, but I'm doing it for École Pratique des Hautes Études for Paris.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. Wow, it would be a great skill for a lot of us to have, especially we're working with rare books and manuscripts too. So in terms of, a lot of it is for description purposes. That's in terms of just getting that one mark field in terms of the actual date or a range of dates is amazing. It's so important for manuscripts. I want to thank you so much, Judith, for your time, for your patience, for everything, and I'm glad you were able to reschedule the session itself.
Yes, I'm really sorry I couldn't do it the first time, but I'm here and I'm happy to be here.
And I'm glad this worked out, and we were flexible, and you were flexible with the time. I know it's about 9:30 your time now, or maybe even later after almost probably 10.
No, 9:15. That's fine.
Okay, so it's not beyond you
Still
then.
early.
All right. So thank you so much, and we hope to hopefully maybe we'll try again another point also.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're very
Bye.
welcome. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jackie, thank you for letting me back in. So,
She's lovely. How can we get her back?
well, we'll work on that. So I think we could start recording, but let's just see how we can make it into a full course at some point.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, that's a matter of just working things out on our side, I think, more so too. So we'll work on it. This is at least food for thought for next time. But I'm glad at least we got a great introduction. Amazing. Bye, Ursula. Thank you so much for coming in. But yeah, this is something we can play around with, and I think she seems to be open as well. So it's an idea. So we have, but I'm glad this worked out. I learned so much.
Yes.
And Jasmine, that was a great question between a hey and chet.
Yeah, I was curious because obviously my exposure to modern Hebrew makes me biased, and that's a hey.
I know.
Clearly, I mean, she knows what she's talking about, so there must be some way to know that they're different.
Right. Well, once she explained it, that made so much more sense. Now, next time we look at manuscripts, okay. I mean, I know there's a date, but at least we could say this is not a het or not a hey. So
right,
it makes a big difference.
It sure does.
Thank you. While I have you online here, you guys schedule something for it.
Yes.
We need to figure that out. It may not work out for class AGL classroom, but maybe for catalog.
But you froze. You're frozen. We can't hear you.
But that'll be like, it's because it's more pertinent than a lot of other sessions too. So
wait, sorry, you froze in the middle and I only got the tail end.
Okay, let's figure something out. It won't work out for the education committee, but it won't work out at all. So, but for cataloging forum, Neil and I are still putting together the schedule. So we still have one slot, but maybe we could work something where a full expansion or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and Neil's interest is in terms of relevance, this is like the most relevant of all topics. So,
which is that?
Hebrew grammar for romanization purposes.
Yes.
So anyways, it's 4:30 almost on my time.
Yeah,
And I want to thank you really for showing up today. It was nice. We almost hit 30, so that's a great number for us,
yeah, it was a really nice turnout.
especially considering the time is after the 2:30 mark for most people. Too.
Yeah.
But anyways, I wish you all a Chodesh Tov
Oh, I-
tonight, and we'll
Thanks,
touch base
Fred.
again. Oh, Rebecca, yep.
Oh, I wanted to say thanks very much because years ago, the Jewish Theological Seminary offered a course on Hebrew paleography, but it was during the day and I was working full time because I wanted to take it. So I'm hoping you can at least get a demo from her. It's easier to see when you demo and maybe a follow-up, but
Good question. I'll ask her about that. I mean, she really was very enthusiastic about her product, so I think we could get something.
yeah, so it was great.
Yep.
Thanks
Indeed.
very much.
You're welcome, Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks for your hard work and making it happen.
We'll make it happen, God willing. So I want to wish you all a good morning and a good afternoon.
Yes, take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hello, there's only Susan here. Are you still there, Susan? Or Suzanne? I'm ending.